He wasn't supposed to feel. He wasn't supposed to speak. But when he did, even the king wept. Its walls glittered under the morning sun, guarded by men who were trained not just in combat, but in silence. The royal guards, the king's living statues. They were not allowed to blink too long, not allowed to speak, and certainly never allowed to show emotion. For the people, they were the perfect symbol of power, motionless, disciplined, untouchable. But beneath that polished armor and the rigid stances lived beating hearts for being molded into emotionless sentinels. Among them stood Amit Varney, a guy's hid a story that even time itself had forgotten. For 5 years, he had stood at the main courtyard gate, day after day, in scorching heat, in freezing cold, watching the world pass him by. He remembered the boy he used to be, the one who played the flute by the riverside, before duty took away his music. It was the king's annual charity procession day, when nobles and citizens filled the palace gardens to celebrate the generosity of the crown. Musicians played in the distance, servants hurried with golden trays, and laughter floated like petals in the wind. Amit stood unmoving near the grand fountain, his spear upright, his gaze fixed. To anyone watching, he was just another statue of steel and red cloth. Then, a small girl's cry pierced the harmony. A doll had fallen into the fountain, a small, handmade toy that drifted just out of reach. The girl's sobbing echoed through the garden. The nobles glanced, whispered, then looked away. To cross the line between the guests and the guards was forbidden. Amit's eyes twitched. The child's trembling hands reminded him of his sister years ago. His chest tightened. For the first time in years, his fingers moved on their own. He stepped forward, once, twice, and before the crowd realized what was happening, Amit knelt, reached into the cold water, and retrieved the doll. He handed it back to the girl with a soft whisper that only she could hear. "Smile again. The world always looks better when you do." The girl smiled through her tears, clutching the wet doll to her chest. Around them, time seemed to stop. Then murmurs began spreading. The royal guard had spoken. He had moved. Amit returned to his post silently, his face once again calm and distant. But inside him, something had cracked open, something long asleep. That night, the guards' quarters buzzed with whispers. "Did you really speak to her?" asked Deep, one of the younger guards, disbelief shining in his eyes. Amit didn't answer. He simply stared at the flickering oil lamp, the flame reflecting off his armor. "Do you realize what you've done?" another guard muttered. "They could strip you of your badge for that." Amit finally spoke. "If showing kindness is treason, maybe this kingdom needs more traitors." His voice was calm but heavy. None of them replied. They all knew he was right. That single act, the smallest breach of discipline, had shaken the invisible wall between man and machine. And yet none of them could deny it. The image of that little girl's smile haunted them too. 2 days later, the palace prepared for the Festival of Harmony, where musicians from across the land performed before the royal family. As the royal guests gathered, the guards took their positions along the stage pillars. Deep, who had once been a street musician before becoming a guard, stood with his spear beside a group of flutists. The sound of the flute pierced his soul. He remembered his mother's lullabies, the same melody she played before dying in poverty. The crowd clapped, the music swelled, and suddenly he felt his hand tighten around the spear. His heart screamed to join the sound. He lifted the flute from a nearby musician's tray, and before anyone could stop him, began to play. The notes that flowed from him weren't perfect. They trembled, wavered, but they were real. The palace froze. The other flutists fell silent. Only Deep's melody remained, cutting through the air like sunlight after storm clouds. It wasn't rebellion. It was remembrance. It was life returning to a man who had forgotten to breathe. When the final note faded, silence hung like mist. Then, someone clapped. Just once. It was a child's hand. Then another. Then 100 more. Amit watched from the gate, and though he couldn't move, his eyes softened. Deep's melody had done what years of silence could not. It had made the guards human again. High above, from the royal balcony, stood Princess Naiva, the king's only daughter. She had grown within the palace walls like a caged bird, forbidden to mingle with commoners, told that emotion was weakness. But that day, she had seen something the court never showed her: humanity. She saw Amit bend the rules to bring back a child's smile. She saw Deep break discipline to play a song of love. That night, she couldn't sleep. She snuck out of her chambers, barefoot, through the corridors, and into the guards' quarters. The men froze, shocked. A royal stepping into their quarters was unheard of. Naiva raised her lantern and said softly, "I want to know, why did you break the rules?" Amit lowered his gaze. "Because sometimes silence becomes heavier than death." Deep added, "Because we forgot how to feel and then remembered again." Naiva looked at them with wide eyes, as if seeing the truth for the first time. "My father believes strength is the absence of feeling. But maybe the real strength is to feel and still stand tall." Her words echoed in the dimly lit chamber. That night, something unspoken passed between them, a promise that change, though dangerous, had already begun. The following weeks saw quiet defiance growing among the guards. Small acts of compassion, the way that Neil would help an old maid carry water, or how Amit allowed a beggar shelter during the rain, spread through the palace like whispers of rebellion. But rebellion wasn't what they sought. It was restoration, the restoration of soul within duty. Yet not everyone approved. The captain of the guard, Sir Halvin, summoned Amit and Deep to his chamber. His voice thundered, "You disgrace the uniform. A guard does not smile, sing, or console peasants. You are the king's shadow, nothing more." Amit looked him in the eye. "Even shadows are born from light, Captain. You can't erase the sun." For that, Amit was punished. 3 days confined, stripped of his position at the front gate. But punishment could not silence what had already awakened. The other guards began to change too, quietly, one by one. Meanwhile, Princess Naiva's heart grew restless. She began sneaking out in disguise, visiting the city streets. For the first time, she saw hunger, laughter, suffering, and hope, all the things her father's rules had hidden from her. Everywhere she went, people spoke kindly of the guards who had helped them in small ways. "The Red Soldiers, they're different now. They look at us like we matter." Those words struck her deeply. She realized that what the guards had done wasn't breaking character, it was restoring the kingdom's humanity. That night, she wrote a letter to the king, but didn't send it. Instead, she decided to prove to him that compassion could guard a kingdom better than fear. The annual Night of the Lanterns arrived, a grand event where the king addressed his people from the palace balcony. Thousands of lanterns lit up the sky, reflecting over the marble walls. The guards lined the courtyard, motionless as ever, but inside their hearts they burned with unspoken emotion. As the king began his speech about discipline, honor, and silence, a single lantern drifted down and landed near Amit's boots. A child's lantern, marked with shaky handwriting. "Thank you, kind soldier." Amit felt tears rising, but he held firm. Deep beside him whispered under his breath, "We are alive, brother. No punishment can take that away." And for a brief, golden moment, the lantern light flickered across their faces, revealing what no one had seen before. Smiles hidden behind centuries of silence. From the balcony, Princess Naiva saw it too. She closed her eyes and whispered, "They've reminded us what character truly means." And thus began the quiet revolution, not with swords, but with kindness. The kingdom of Althar began to change quietly after that night of lanterns. The whispers of the people grew into songs, songs about guards who smiled, about kindness that lived even inside armor. But in the marble halls of the palace, those same whispers sounded like thunder. The royal council gathered in secret, their golden rings clinking on the table as they spoke. "The guards are becoming too soft," growled Minister Corvin. "Discipline is fading. If this spreads, the king's image will crumble." "They were trained to be walls, not poets," said another. "Walls can't inspire loyalty," a third whispered, but his voice was drowned by the rest. And at the head of the table sat King Aldrich, old and weary, his crown heavy not just with jewels, but with years of rigid belief. He had ruled for 40 decades with one unbroken rule: order before emotion. Yet lately he had noticed something strange. When the guards helped people, the people loved the king more, not less. And deep down, though he wouldn't admit it, that realization shook him. Still, fear of change runs deep in old bones. "Enough," he said finally. "We will remind them who commands the palace. Double the training. Silence will be restored." By dawn, Amit, Deep, and Neil were summoned to the courtyard. Before hundreds of soldiers, they were accused of breaking sacred conduct. Captain Halvin read the verdict. "You are hereby suspended from service for dishonor to the royal guard." Amit's face remained calm, but his heart clenched. He looked at the king's balcony, empty now, but he could almost feel Princess Naiva's presence watching somewhere unseen. As the guard's armor was stripped away, something unexpected happened. The citizens who had gathered outside the gates began to shout, "Let them stay! They protected us! They made us believe in you again!" The king, hearing the noise from his chamber, paused mid-step. This was not defiance, it was gratitude. And for the first time, he hesitated. Meanwhile, Amit turned to his brothers. "They can take our armor," he said softly, "but not our duty." The three bowed to the crowd and walked away, not as soldiers, but as men reborn. That night, Princess Naiva stormed into the king's private chamber. The guards outside tried to stop her, but she glared at them with a fire no one had ever seen. "Father," she said, "you punished them for being human." "They defied royal order," the king replied coldly. "No," she said firmly, "they followed the order of the heart, the one you taught me to bury." The king's hand trembled slightly. "You don't understand what it means to rule. A kingdom must fear its crown." Naiva stepped closer. "Fear builds silence, not loyalty. Those men inspired the people because they reminded them we still have hearts." For a long moment, father and daughter stood in silence. The candlelight flickered between them, one flame divided by shadow. Finally, the king sighed. "You are too young to see the burden of the throne," Naiva whispered. "And you are too old to remember its soul." Before he could reply, she turned and left, her cloak trailing like a storm behind her. In the days that followed, Amit and the other dismissed guards returned to the city. They walked through the same streets they once watched over from the palace walls. Now, for the first time, they saw everything up close: hungry children, broken bridges, laughter that survived in poverty. They helped where they could. Amit taught boys to defend themselves. Deep played music in the market square, drawing crowds that smiled even when their stomachs were empty. Neil built small shelters for the old and the sick. Soon, the people began calling them the Red Brothers, the guards who gave up armor but never stopped protecting. And their fame reached the palace once again. The king's advisors grew nervous. "They are gathering power," Corvin warned. "They could spark a rebellion." But Naiva said quietly, "They are healing what you ignored." The king didn't answer. He just stared out the window at the flickering lanterns that dotted the city, tiny flames of compassion he could no longer control. Then, one morning, the bells tolled across Althar. The king had fallen ill. A mysterious fever struck him down. The court physicians whispered of curses, of age, of divine punishment. The council panicked. The people wept, for despite his flaws, King Aldrich was still their pillar. Princess Naiva stayed by his side day and night, but as the days stretched on, his condition worsened. "The people must not see me weak," the king murmured. "Father," Naiva said, tears in her eyes, "they deserve to see you human." He looked away, ashamed. For the first time, the unbreakable king feared his own mortality. Outside, unrest began to stir. Without leadership, the city's borders weakened. Thieves, famine, and fear crept in. And so, the princess made a bold decision. Late one night, Naiva rode through the rain to the old barracks on the edge of town. There, around a small fire, Amit and his brothers sat, their faces lit by orange flame. When she appeared, every man rose in shock. "Your Highness," Amit said, bowing slightly. "Please," she whispered, "no titles tonight. I need your help." She explained her plan. The king was dying, the people were scared, and the palace had turned into a cage of fear. If the people could see that compassion still lives in the heart of the crown, maybe they'd believe again. Maybe the king would too. Deep frowned. "You're asking us to go back after what he did to us?" Naiva looked at him with pleading eyes. "Not for him, for the people, for the kingdom you already saved." Amit nodded slowly. "We started this by breaking silence. Let's finish it by breaking fear." The brothers stood. The storm outside howled like an omen, but their resolve was steady. They would return to the palace, not as guards, but as hearts unchained. The next morning, a miracle unfolded. At sunrise, the palace gates opened, not for soldiers, but for citizens. The people of Althar flooded into the courtyard, carrying lanterns, flowers, and prayers. Leading them were the Red Brothers, dressed in their old crimson uniforms, though now stained with dirt and rain. As they reached the steps of the palace, the old king was brought out on a chair, pale but awake, his eyes weak yet watching. The crowd fell silent. Amit stepped forward and knelt. "My king," he said softly, "we never meant to disobey. We only wished to serve in a way that mattered." The king's voice cracked. "You served better than I ever did." A hush swept over the courtyard. The king looked at his daughter, then at his people. Tears glistened in his eyes. "All these years," he said slowly, "I thought discipline built a kingdom, but it is compassion that keeps it alive." He raised his trembling hand. "Let the guards serve not as statues, but as protectors of hearts. Let kindness be our law." The crowd erupted in cheers. Lanterns floated into the morning sky, golden against the rising sun. And in that light, it seemed as if the kingdom itself breathed again. Months later, the palace no longer felt cold. The guards laughed openly. Children played near the fountain where Ahmet had once broken his silence. The people and soldiers shared meals, stories, and songs. Princess Naiva was crowned as regent queen when her father, now recovered, stepped back from the throne. Her first decree was carved into marble. "The strength of Althar lies not in fear, but in empathy." Under her rule, the guards trained not just in combat, but in healing, teaching, and service. Amit became captain of the royal guard, not because of loyalty alone, but because he understood what it meant to feel. Deep opened a music hall within the palace grounds, teaching children the same flute melody that once defied silence. Neil became the palace's first counselor for the poor. And as for Neva, every dawn she would stand on the balcony and watch the city come alive, the lanterns glowing faintly, even in daylight. She often whispered to herself, "They say the guards broke character, but I know they simply found their souls." Final scene, the legacy. Years later, travelers who came to Althar would always pause before the grand fountain. There stood a bronze statue, not of the king, not of the princess, but of a guard kneeling to hand a doll to a child. At the base of the statue, the inscription read, "Strength is not in silence, but in the courage to care." And every year, on the night of the lanterns, the people of Althar would fill the sky once again, not to honor the king, but to remember the guards who dared to feel, and in doing so, reminded the world that even those sworn to stillness can make hearts move. The palace no longer stood as a symbol of power. It stood as a monument to compassion.